In the history of video games, not many fan products become full-fledged games with their own dedicated clients in Steam and loyal communities that are still going strong. Garry's Mod, Killing Floor, Team Fortress, Counter-Strike, Enderal. It's always been a sign of a really good game if it makes you feel good after you play it. You recommend it to your friends, maybe you replay it once every 4 years and add it to your list of favorites. But the sign of a great game is the vast emptiness it makes you feel after you finish it. This is the kind of game we're going to talk about. And calling Enderal a mod doesn't do it justice, therefore from here on out I will refer to it as a wholesome game. I will try to avoid going into the spoiler territory, except for the ending, which I will be discussing at length. But I will warn you when to click to another timecode to skip it. If I have to explain this video with one sentence before you switch it off, it would go a little something like this. Imagine dating Skyrim all these 12-something years and then discover that Skyrim actually has a hotter sister. This is the image I always have in my head when I venture into the world of Win. That's right, the developers came up with their own star system, their own lore, their own history that is written in blood. And they also have a modification for Oblivion that came out first and predates the story of Enderal. But technically you don't need to actually play it to understand what's going on here. I mean, I didn't play it myself and I'm doing just fine. So why make a big video set in different tone that's dedicated to not even a game but a modification? Well, if I can hazard a guess of my target audience age, then I can say that after your teenage years and growing up with Morrowind, Gothic, Chrono Trigger, Fallout, The Witcher, and Mass Effect, you subconsciously compare every experience of a new game with the thing you idolized when you were a kid, and it will always fall short of that magical feeling. And that wasn't the game, that was all you. And you know it was you all along, but you blame games for falling short of some unreachable milestones a game is supposed to have. For example, you'll go and say, sure, the game is fine, but the story is not compelling, or inventory management is bad, or graphics aren't much to write home about. It's always easy to find something you hate, rather than finding something you love. But Enderal, somehow, brings us as close as possible to that feeling once more, when you're quietly playing at 2 AM trying not to wake up your parents because you have school tomorrow. And you know what? It's true. It's that good. To paraphrase the movie Stand By Me, I'll say this. I never played any games later on like the ones I had when I was in school. Jesus, does anyone? But I say again, this game brings you as close to your teenage years as possible. With both of my feet firmly planted in adulthood until my recent and rather rapid professional termination, I could tell you that usually adults don't have much time to play. So we need to pick our fruits very carefully, and that's why ratings became a thing. So let's take a look at how this game fares in that department. Huh, how about that? Well, I guess it's worth it, I told myself on some idle Tuesday. Among all my friends, I can say with absolute certainty that they all played Skyrim, but I've never heard anyone calling Skyrim their favorite game. The opposite could be said about Morrowind, but its successor falls short to appeal to the hearts of many, as it seems. And somehow, this lukewarm game manages to sell 30 million copies worldwide. But now people see it as a joke of a game, a meme. Its combat is bad and can be made as its main focus, RPG mechanics are simplified so that even a child can play it on Nintendo Switch. Most quests are either when you fetch something or kill someone, and AI companions are non-characters and generally horrible. Sure, there's exploration, but this little thing is what kills it completely for me. It makes it so you don't even have to look for something. You are overstuffed with shit to do. It's a never-ending sushi train of copy-pasted slop that you are forced to go through because you're afraid that maybe next dungeon has a better layout and better loot, so you gotta go investigate. But it doesn't. It's a curse of diminishing returns. You invest a lot of time and get little enjoyment. And that's the rules of Skyrim exploration. And yes, while Enderal still has the compass issue, at least the environment is gorgeous and the main plot is extremely compelling. Skyrim is a game where gameplay is put as a very distant secondary feature, and the only redemption it gets is from modifications, like Enderal. And no, wait, I'm not finished. You know what's the most insulting in all of this? It's the fact that Skyrim doesn't teach us anything. They fail even at that. But if we refer to Enderal instead, I believe we can find lots of life lessons. About how to cope with hate, how to forgive, how to change for the better, how not to give up despite everything, how to open up to people, and how to overcome your fears, and much more. Games are supposed to have a message. They shouldn't preach or follow any agenda, mind you, but they should have a message. It is absolutely criminal that I can play Enderal for free. It is this game why I decided to do YouTube actually. Because I wanted to tell everyone about it, and now I feel I can do this game review justice. And if I happen to make a good video, please let me know. I will read every comment to find some comfort that I made something that makes you feel nice. Here's the thing, guys. I can't really remember anything from Skyrim, even though my Steam account says that I've played quite a lot of it, and dear listener, you better believe me when I say that I have not tried a single sex mod, so that's a miss. I just played vanilla most of the time. But I don't think I ever finished the main questline. The only thing I remember is shouting at civilians, the first tutorial dragon, and the sellsword that became my extended inventory. That's it. And aside from that, I really am drawing a blank here, man. And that's the problem of sinking 100-something hours and not remembering anything. It's as if my brain is protecting me by repressing all the bad gameplay I had to endure. And that is how you know the game is not great, because you can't retell your victories, your hardships, your finished quests, and everything else that an epic story should give you. Now, why did that happen? I did enjoy Morrowind a bunch, and still have fond memories about it, even though I haven't replayed it in ages. But here's the thing, you can never go home again. You can't make the same game twice. So, some changes are in order. But what changes? Good or bad ones? I personally think it's the latter. First of all, we desperately need to casualize the game so that more people would pick it up. So please go ahead and remove my favorite spell system. I am definitely not mad about that. And secondly, we need even more people to buy it, so we bank on something familiar for die-hard fans and add something risky, but not too risky. And Bethesda somehow failed in the biggest way possible. These are not dragons, these are wyverns. You know, fact-checking is important, Mr. Chessmaster. It does seem to me that every time we're playing the next installment of Elder Scrolls, they take away some parts to follow the immaculate business model that states that a sequel can only be considered good if it outsells the predecessor, gameplay quality be damned. And so, we come to inevitable conclusion. Skyrim is a product. Enderal is a journey. Enderal is the case where we can play a proper Elder Scrolls game that Bethesda cannot make for that financial reason. Enderal doesn't concern itself with petty business models that govern over the development process. No need for sales numbers, after all. So, the unfortunate fate of Skyrim is to become a joke in everyone's eyes. And that's too bad, because the foundation is there. They just had to take a different course in game mechanics and writing. However, we can finally see what Skyrim could become. It is here, in Enderal. Welcome, everyone. Skyrim was a game that was not driven by internal compass, so to speak. That's why it wasn't a journey. It was a field trip to copy-paste dungeons to renew your soulstones, and nothing more. Most locations are very self-contained and have nothing to do with the overall story. The only motivation I could see in exploring those places was anxiety. We were worried that we would miss out on that one dungeon that isn't a copy with randomly generated reward in the end. It was a malignant case of quantity over quality. And I don't think that good DLCs absolve the main game from it. In Enderal, it's the opposite. The world is dying and you're witnessing the countless stories of how people trying to cope with it. From following a prophecy to building an airship to get the fuck out. You're there to act on those things, to make the world react to your Sisyphean attempts to stop the apocalypse from happening. Did I say apocalypse? Well, hold your horses, we're not there yet. So, if we are to ask Sure AI, the developer of this glorious modification, the question of what's your aim? What's your ultimate goal with this thing you made? They would certainly answer to tell you a story. And honestly, that straightforwardness can go a long way. But let me spoil you a little bit, just to show you how the journey begins. If you don't want to see any spoilers, skip to this time code. It won't be long, I promise.
Oh, hey there. I didn't see you coming. So, how did it go? Did you find it? Where are we? We're at home, silly. Where else would we be? Just mommy, sister, you and me. Now tell me, how did it go? Did you find it? No? Pity. Maybe you're simply looking in the wrong places. Did you ever think of that? Oh well, who knows? Say, why don't you go inside and see if you can help Mommy with the cooking? The Creator was kind to us today and sent a big fat elk right in front of my bow. All right? I totally forgot what a mess I left here. But I was right, wasn't I? A real gem we've got here. Well then, let's waste no more time and get to it, shall we? What? Now would you look at that? I totally forgot about them. They're dead, don't you remember? You murdered them back then, both of them. But hey, no use crying over spilled milk, right? At least this means there's more meat for the two of us. You still remember how to do this, right? First, off with the skin. Slice up the belly, then out with the entrails. I'll look for a nice sharp knife in the meantime, to cut off the head. I don't think either of us wants to eat that, do we? Oh, silly, what's this again? We both know that's a lie. You did it. I remember it all. First, you set this horrible fire to your sister's crib. She screamed and screamed, and Mommy heard it, but when she finally got there, nothing was left of her but burnt flesh. And... oh gosh, do we really need to go through this again? You know how sad it makes me when you do this. You killed them, period. No matter how often you tell me you didn't, it changes nothing. You hear me? Nothing. Now please, let's start cooking. I'm so bloody damn hungry. Oh, by the Creator's name, why are you telling these lies? Isn't it enough that you murdered us? Do you really have to bother me over and over with your stupid, pathetic, and pointless whining? You know, sometimes I wish the Creator would have made me just a little less merciful. Just a little less pious. Because then I would have realized that you were tainted by sin long before any of this had ever happened. And instead of raising you, feeding you, and loving you like a father does, I would have put you in the horse trough right after you were born. Yes, I should have killed you. I should have just killed you. Just like you killed us. And now, you think you're safe because we're all under the earth, don't you? Well, listen up, my child. You are wrong. And do you know why? Because the dead don't forget. Do you hear me? The dead don't forget. Now enough of this useless chatter. I'm bloody starving. Bring me the meat, you spoiled brat. Bring it to me. Bring me a nice crisp piece of meat. 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 Bring me a nice crisp piece of meat.
Well, what do you think? Are you not on board with this? Certainly better than escaping the scripted wyvern to solve the damn claw puzzle, in my opinion. It is critical to your character's motivation, and, as all games should, the beginning will be explained and resolved later on. But now we know that some force is trying to overcome us. In what way? We don't know. What we do know is that yet again we're starting the game as a stowaway. This is a good thing taken straight from the Book of Elder Scrolls. They do this thing every time with this trope of rags to riches, and it works on so many levels for most of the players. After all, chaos is a ladder, as they say. And here in Enderal, we're desperately going to need to climb it. How we're going to do this is another thing. There's a lots of viable builds. They don't require you to be stealth archer like in the original game. Individuality is the ultimate ideal of RPG games, which is why almost every Elder Scrolls except for Daggerfall starts with you being a prisoner, a clean slate. No history, no past, no burdens. And in Enderal, you start just like that, a fleshless, clean slate. Anyway, I just said that individuality is the highest virtue of RPG as a genre. You're playing to make your character ascend, sometimes even literally so. Pitting yourself against the story, against the insurmountable odds, against the status quo that you're challenging with your presence and then coming out as a victor in the struggle, this is the ultimate reward of any game in the genre. Which is why, if you think about it, very few RPG games end with main character's death, because it's a power trip. And few games dare to tread into the dark territory and leave our character without completing the Joseph Campbell cycle of the hero with 1,000 faces. And if you do it, it feels wrong, like something is off. But I digress. I think Bethesda just failed fundamentally to approach this issue and ask themselves, why is this important? Why should our game start like this? And judging by their track record, they don't really use any other approach. It's almost always the same start plus some minor tweaks here and there. It's kinda like Star Wars movies. I am afraid that I might catch a lot of flack for saying this, but with Star Wars movies nowadays, it's always the same kind of story, always playing it safe, or write what you know, as they say. Ironically, the vast universe of Star Wars is always tied to the same narrative, same conflict, same kinds of heroes and villains. Which is why my favorite Star Wars product has to do the least with all of this and can be perceived as a dark horse of the series. Same as Star Wars Holiday Special once was. And that is, you've guessed it, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2. It's in my top 10 games of all time because it finally gave us a different perspective on things.
The Jedi, the Sith, you don't get it, do you? To the galaxy, they're the same thing. Just men and women with too much power, squabbling over religion while the rest of us burn. At least the Sith are honest about what they're killing for. The Jedi are pacifists, except in times of war. They're teachers, except when it comes to telling their students the truth. And when they save you, it's only so you can suffer more.
Something that we never thought about before, because we were bombarded with the same old narrative each time and we were conditioned to think that it's the right way to go. But remember, only Sith deal in absolutes. There is always another way. Same goes for the Elder Scrolls series. This burning question that these games can be something else, something better. That's why I don't like Skyrim, because it feels the most convenient of the series. RPGs can either tell us a story or give us the tools to write our own. And Skyrim thinks that I am an absolute hack that can only write airport novels. Thanks so gosh darn much, Skyrim. Now I feel really invested in the story. And here's a question for you, my wonderful viewer. People have emotional responses to both passive and active entertainment. And if you look at the stories that have been told since time immemorial, it is clear that we can empathize with almost anything. So it's not the question of what can get our emotional response, it's a question of how does it do that. Sorry for the long preamble, but here's my actual question. Do you remember what sort of emotional response you got from playing Skyrim? And if so, did it stick to you in any way? Why or why not? And I think, and you may disagree with me of course, that more emotions were evoked before the game was actually released and not where you were actually playing it. Many people were moved by the game trailer, but not by the game itself. Skyrim is what you make of it. Don't want to pursue the main plot? Sure, we have vampires, werewolves and dragons to slay. Don't want that either? Well, there's a bunch of side quests you can be doing. It's all over the place, and that's why it's miles wide, inches deep. It offers you everything and nothing, since it doesn't all come together in the end. There's no finality to all of this. It's just something to pass your time with. It feels like doing digital chores, because it ultimately gives you nothing. And I'm aware that many people want exactly that. No strings attached, no plot, no story, no engagement. Too much freedom and we wouldn't know what to do with it. No rules, no laws, pure anarchy. You probably started stealing all the items and quickly became a millionaire. But so what? What does that actually achieve? Nothing, because the game itself is aimless. Enderal is not like that. Not quite. I'm not saying it doesn't have all those things, it does, but it also leaves you small breadcrumbs here and there, and if you're mindful enough, you get to find them and draw your own conclusions. Every dungeon in Enderal has a motive, has its own story, and it does tell you a lot through environmental storytelling. But at the very least I can say this, Enderal is always about its main story. Despite the open world, despite the side quests, despite everything, it always finds a way to show glimpses of plot points that are relevant to the main story. If anything, Enderal is about inevitability. Inevitability is how Enderal builds its narrative. Without going into spoilers, I can say that the main plot explains almost every dungeon, every cave. You're playing in the dark fantasy, and the signs of apocalypse are seen everywhere, and the development team has done a lot of work to make every dungeon follow that theme as well. When you delve into the dungeon, you know exactly why the situation got out of hand and why it's now infested with monsters or bandits. That is, if you're careful enough to look for these signs to begin with. But it's very rewarding if you pay close attention. If I am to choose a similar style, I would say Dark Souls is sort of similar in its presentation. It's bleak and dangerous world full of mysteries that have explanations if you know where to look. And here, freedom is traded for progression. The game doesn't have scalable enemies, instead everything is fixed right at the start, so you can't go out there and explore every nook and cranny, because that's a sure way to get yourself killed. You can level up for sure, but that will take you some linear progression through the main story to get you in the loop of all the events that are happening. And what has been happening in the world of Wynn? Let's take a step back and talk about the world building of the game. There's a lot to unpack, but please, give me a minute, I'll try to catch you up to speed with the most important stuff. Since we play as a foreigner in Enderal, we don't exactly know what has been going on in the world. The intro cinematic tells us about the Lightborn, a group of 7 mages that ascended into godhood to watch over the people of Wynn. The Lightborn believed that their rule of the world was necessary in preventing total destruction, which liberated mankind would inevitably bring upon themselves. But as it so happens, there's a civil war that breaks out. People are rebelling against the iron grip control of Lightborn over them. This civil war proves to be successful and the Lightborn are killed. This news creates great strife and instability in many countries. In all, in fact, except one, Enderal. Enderal is the most pious of the countries, and some 30 years ago, the government initiated a policy of isolationism, allowing few ships to come into ports and accepting no news of recent civil war. You are a stowaway that is running away from the scourge of war and seeking better life on the isolated continent, willing to do whatever it takes to survive. This impulse, your desire to survive, will play a great role in the game, but I don't want to get into spoilers. I just want you to remember that the greatest peril in life is forgetting one's own ideals. Enderal is theocracy, and its society is collectivist. This is clearly seen in their religion. Their god, Malphas, who's one of the Lightborn, assigns path to every person. And every person should live according to his path. Paths are like castes, so you can't become an aristocrat if you weren't born with a certain family. Paths are bestowed from father to son, so bloodlines matter a lot in this society. In Enderal, there are no kings, no councils, only Order of the Keepers answering to Malphas. They act as paladins, and in order to become one, you need to walk the Sublime Path, which is the highest possible path one can have. What's interesting is that individuality is shunned and often perceived as a sin, because a person cannot wish to become something greater that he was born with. Very rarely are there cases where a person can ascend to a higher path. Usually, such people become the stuff of legends. And yet, individuality is something that can make you pathless. The pathless are people who have relinquished their original path, usually by committing a crime or by ignoring the boundaries of their original caste. That's why they are hated by the common folk of Enderal. And while foreigners are also technically pathless, this negative connotation doesn't carry over since they haven't had a path to begin with, because they live outside the path system. Our main character is one such case. Such is the lore of the game. And now that we're done discussing that, let's talk about what changes did Enderal bring to the table. First of all, you will notice that the game has different races. This is done because the world of Wynn is different to Tamriel, hence the difference. But it still has the same utilitarian approach. One race for one-handed weapons, one for magic, one for persuasion rolls, one for two-handed weapons. You will definitely find one that you will enjoy. Also, Enderal finally introduces something that should have been in the main game: set bonuses. Something that looks and feels so easy and intuitive has been absent from Skyrim ever since it came out. I already mentioned that there is no enemy scaling, so that's not really much of a classic open world game. It still has a certain degree of linearity to it, and linearity is what makes it great. You always know where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing. You won't get tired of the world because you will level up and unlock the next location where you can progress. Freedom in Skyrim lacks consequences. Sure, you can go anywhere, do anything, but it will have a zero impact on your story and your character progression, because all Draugr crypts look the same and they don't give you anything fun. But here, exploration is rewarding, because you find stuff you can actually use, like a good set of armor, a weapon, skill books, or a new spell. This mod was made by German devs, so speaking about the leveling system, I'll give you exactly 3 seconds to think of what kind of game inspired them. 3, 2, 1, yes, of course it's Gothic. I believe now it's a part of German school curriculum to play all those 3 games. And that's honestly great, because now when we level up, we've given points we need to distribute across different trees of talents. Do you want to be a summoner rogue? Go right ahead. A werewolf with a hint of 2-hand weapons. Archer with a 1-hand weapon to finish them off? Sure, why not? Here, leveling works better because you need to strategize, because the best skills usually start to appear from the middle of the skill tree and closer to the top. This requires planning and discipline, 2 things that were missing from Skyrim, of course. That was about talents, but what about our skills like lockpicking or destruction magic? Well, some changes here too. Now you need to buy books to upgrade your skills. And I've heard people calling this system badly designed because you need to wait for vendors to restock them. And I honestly agree. Nobody has patience for such things anymore. And just like in real life, textbooks here are really fucking expensive, so you might consider getting a bank loan for them. Another important mechanic that was introduced in Enderal is Arcane Fever. Arcane Fever is something that all magically gifted people are suffering from. If it goes up too high, you will die. The more you cast your spells, the higher the fever gets, so you can't summon endless hordes of skeletons to take care of business. Now you need to buy, or make, a special potion that will alleviate your pain. The potion is expensive, making magic builds very costly, but rewarding in the end when you achieve an equilibrium of having enough powerful spells and enough Arcane Fever potions. All these changes accentuate the fact that the gameplay in Skyrim was always a peripheral thing. It was an attempt to lure you with some things, like exploration, copy-pasted dungeons, dragons that were actually wyverns, pointless guilds, whereas Enderal is an attempt to show you the experience of a grand RPG campaign. And what's a grand RPG campaign without a crown jewel of a city? Luckily, we have one. Ark. Every time I enter a city in any game, I ask myself a question. Could I live here? And the answer was usually no. But let's visit the only big city in Enderal, Ark. In most of the games, a village looks just like one street from the 19th century. I mean, look, there are even certain similarities with Skyrim, but what's the biggest difference here? Space. No wagon could have gone afoot in such claustrophobic places. Imperial City is perhaps the only candidate for having an infrastructural arteries that seem to be missing in every other city. Let's look at Solitude, seat of the High King and capital of the province. Oh yeah? High King of what? 20-something buildings? Yeah, I wonder how long it would take for everyone to die there of dysentery since there's no indoor plumbing. Blech. Back to Ark. It is so big that we need loading screens in the year of our Lord 2023. Chapel? Check. Merchant District? Check. City Underbelly? Check again. Military Barracks? You better believe that's a check, baby. And of course, like every city on Earth worth visiting in real life and in video games, a landmark. Something that stands out so much that you can see it at night. And again, check. When you first see the city from the distance, you think to yourself, oh, that's a nice statue on top of the city, but I can never go there. Well, think again, because Temple District is located right over there, and you are cordially invited. Well, sort of. Moral of the story for all game devs watching this video? Sometimes when you're making something that you don't have any real experience in, it's worth reaching out to actual experts in the field and asking for their help. Because I'm not convinced that Bethesda knows how to build a believable city. And boy oh boy did they have many attempts to do so. I suppose this is a love letter to Ark, because I guarantee you that my time spent there is 20 or even 30 times longer than I've spent in the official Counterpart series. And I promise you, the first time you set foot there, you wouldn't want to go back to questing, because there's Ark and the stark difference between Enderal and ye old Skyrim. Ark is architecturally sound, and if you ask me, it has structure, it's big, and it's all this game has to offer, unfortunately. There are 2 smaller towns and several trade outposts, but no more arcs, just this one. Far as I'm concerned, it's all we need, because whoever made this city cannot outdo himself one more time. This is the one, people. It's our Ark. But we really have to get going. Skyrim is a product. Enderal is a journey. And what is a journey without companions? It would be pretty lonely otherwise, and I think this kind of epic adventure of one lonely guy can be traced back to the first Elder Scrolls game. Strangely enough, Bethesda doesn't pay much attention to your companions, making them what is essentially a mule that can trigger several lines of dialogue when you progress further into the story, but that's it. Again, I feel that the perfect mix of loneliness and epicness of your adventure can be found in Morrowind, and it is loved by so many people for that very reason. But Enderal took a different approach. They bestow upon you not one, not two, but three possible companions with their own arc, own progression, own story that doesn't get in the way of yours. But companions in this game are not just companions, they're real people, and despite them being NPCs, they can fuck off and do their own things. They're not glued to you. They have their own business to take care of, and they meet up with you only if there's an important job to consider. And isn't this how you make interesting characters? If you just make them follow you all the time, then there's no story. It is way more realistic when you get together for an important quest, slay some monsters, and then they open the veil of secrecy and tell you something about themselves. That way they don't just unload their entire sub-story on you the moment you meet them in a short dialogue sequence, and then they shut up forever and follow along with all the war crimes you commit. What's great about Enderal companions is that they don't just grow on you grow on them. And that's a fantastic feeling. There are exactly two characters we need to talk about. These two are the best examples of character arcs, and they are the most fleshed out characters in the story. Gaspard Delverec is your primary companion throughout the game. He saves your skin early in the game, and is a great partner altogether. He's very upbeat and chatty like Adair from Pillars of Eternity, and he's very good with a sword, making him a competent ally. When you first meet him, you don't know him very well. But he knows a lot about you because you tell him your life story when he saves your unconscious body from bandits. From there, he serves as a gateway character who explains the lore of the game to the player, and incidentally, he's employed by the people we're supposed to meet. So it's a win-win by all accounts. He seems to trust you, because he asks you to help him in doing some detective work around a small town, and then you both meet to exchange your findings where he tells you more about himself. His honest and matter-of-factly disposition makes him an excellent friend, until he tells you that he has no interest in your main questline, simply because the guy is a nihilist. He believes that life has no meaning, which is why his only care in the world is having fun, drinking, and whoring. But, if you're lucky enough with your dialogue options, you just might be able to convince him otherwise. His flaws are what make him an interesting fella. He's the Han Solo archetype to your Luke Skywalker, and seeing this dynamic at work is just fantastic. His quests are by far the most interesting companion quests because they give his character enormous growth. Skyrim has absolutely nothing on Enderal characters, and what's more, they all have character arcs. They progress, develop, they all have their own agency that drives them in the story. I can close my eyes and in 5 seconds explain to you what drives every main character in the game, be it selfish interest, glory, revenge, salvation, or redemption. This game is excellent at exploring many psychological themes, and the main one, of course, is fulfilling your destiny. And speaking of that, let's talk about Theodore Arentiel. First thing I'm going to say about this character is that he made all the right choices considering the information that was known to him. Theodore is the Grand Master of the Order and is the most powerful person in all of Enderal. He was fighting in a war to protect the Lightborn, the war that he waged against his own son, who won and imprisoned his father for the rest of his sorry life. Then, something inexplicable happens. Theodore somehow breaks out of the prison, finds allies in previous enemies, and sails back to Enderal with Neri Me's mages who, seemingly for no reason, want to help him in his newly found cause. He's a charismatic, strong, intelligent, and kind ruler who takes the mantle of the leader chess piece in the old prophecy. For you, though, he's a mentor, the best one you can ask for. He's the one to believe in you from the very start. He's the one who explains everything that's going to happen in the world if you don't succeed in your mission. The game subverts your expectation when you come to a powerful figure and have to convince him of the upcoming calamity, but he wants to hear none of it. Oh no, he believes you from the very start, and you begin to work together by circumventing that annoying part where you have to prove yourself to be the chosen one, etc, etc. He's like an atlas who's holding the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's with you until the very end, and every action he takes, he does so with consideration of the entire nation. There isn't a single monarch character in a video game that would be even close to him in terms of agency and responsibility. He's great and I love him for everything he does. Unfortunately, the ending does something wicked to this character. He becomes the biggest victim of the story, and I don't know if it was intentional or not. Because you stand by this guy 100%, and he would give his life for you in a heartbeat. Which is why seeing what becomes of both you and him in the end is absolutely devastating. But let's not talk about the ending just yet. Another game that makes good transitions from one biome to another is World of Warcraft. Well, at least it did them well when I was playing it up until Lich King expansion. Same variety can be found here, from boreal forest to jungles, from seashore beaches to almost black and white snowy mountains, from eternal autumn to corrupted lands. I mean, just look at this. The world is breathing and we can see it. There are exactly two problems with these regions though. First is, as I mentioned, they don't have friendly cities in them. You have nowhere to go if you want to rest your weary bones or sell the loot that you carry. You are forced to carry teleportation scrolls if you want to have a quick getaway, but that also means that you will have to trek all the way back there, because there's only one checkpoint you can fly to per region. Same thing was with World of Warcraft, 1 or 2 checkpoints per location usually, but regions in Warcraft were way more compact. If you make a beeline to a town, it will rarely take you more than 5 minutes. Here, it's the opposite. It can take you hours exploring just one region, and you'll be hours away from a friendly town if you don't have teleportation scroll. After all, the game map is half the size of Skyrim, and that's a lot. Second problem is much more serious in my opinion. While yes, every region is chock full of ruins, dungeons, bandit hideouts, ancient cities to plunder and explore, these regions don't have any quests. Period. If we don't count the main quest line and companion side quests, the game has in total 54 quests. Sounds a lot, but not really when you consider that almost all of them are issued in Arc. The regions are devoid of quests and there's nothing to do there if you're not up for some old school dungeon raiding. There are no friendly NPCs, no quest givers, and no towns. And that all happened due to one simple thing. Ambition. Ambition is what differentiates great games from good games. There are a lot of great games that are deeply flawed to the core. Arcanum, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, Alpha Protocol, Knights of the Old Republic 2. And I consider Enderal among them. And while, true, you don't have more friendly cities and quests in various regions of the game, I'd take Desolate over Claustrophobic any day because there's nothing worse than becoming a corridor-running game in the RPG genre. RPGs don't translate well when you don't have at least some modicum of freedom and agency. We do have that here, but every time I go into the wilderness, I can't help but wish that this world would be more alive, more populated. I wouldn't have cared if quests sucked because Enderal struck something very deep. A forgotten feeling of a great RPG game that I haven't felt since Dragon Age Awakening. Alas, you see the ambition. You see what the developers wanted to do, but clearly didn't have enough time and resources to do it. Same goes for other games I've mentioned before. When you play them, you can't help but feel the desire to have more of this game you're currently playing. That's a good feeling. But that is not the only frustration I feel with this game. There is something much greater that looms over all of us when we play this game. It is something that we can't wipe from our memory to enjoy this game once again, for it is too great to forget. I'm talking, of course, about the ending. This part is dedicated to those who already played and finished the game, or those who don't care about getting spoiled by the ending of Enderal. Anyway, spoilers ahead, skip to this time code if you don't want the ending spoiled. Look, I know what you're going to say. Mass Effect. Why? Why does it have to be Mass Effect? Jesus. To those unaware, the game weirdly lifts some parts of Mass Effect story, especially the cycle trope. All game events are rigged by the entities that harvest the entire planet once in a while. A cycle renewed and a new High One is born. And when we thought that we outsmarted the supreme intelligence of High Ones by using the old technology left to us by the victims of the previous cycle, in actuality we were the ones who got played instead. So in the end, you don't get your satisfying ending. High Ones are victorious once more, and you either retreat to Star City to regroup and warn the next cycle, or sacrifice yourself to limit the reaping process to just Enderal, giving other nations a chance to live to fight another day. Serious tones of Mass Effect here, don't you think? Like, the whole story looks and smells like Mass Effect. But why would they make such an ending that really seemed like they poorly copied BioWare's homework and didn't even try to hide it? I'll state my case and then I'll even throw a quote from the main story writer to boot. Everyone remembers how you got mad because of those ridiculous endings in Mass Effect 3, right? And we were promised something far greater than just choose your favorite color. But the truth is, the real ending of Mass Effect 3 got leaked months before its release, so the BioWare team just had to cobble something together that would look just as cool as the original ending. But of course, when you are in a crunch like that, you're bound to end up with something far inferior that you originally thought of. The cycle is found many times in literature or TV series, so the idea is hardly new. And now, straight from the writers themselves. Quote, "As for the Mass Effect similarities, no, not really. While I love the Mass Effect franchise, even the ending, don't hit me, the third part came out when the fundamentals of our story had already been set for over half a year. Funnily enough, the first thing I said to Johannes after finishing Mass Effect 3 was that now everyone is going to tell us that we copied them. However, I never saw it as that much of a problem. I thought that it becomes very clear that the core themes of our game are very different from Mass Effect. Mass Effect is about survival and interracial conflicts. Enderal is about mankind's inner demons, the free will and loss. At least that's how I see it. It's only similar on a superficial level. And then again, the fact that the world is threatened by an evil species and is trying to save itself by building a machine isn't something that Mass Effect invented after all. End quote. So, it seems that Sure AI had most of the storyline ready before the release of Mass Effect 3. And let's be honest here, the Cycle story is hardly fresh. If you try, you can definitely find more examples of where it was used. At some point in your childhood, you and your friends went outside to play together for the last time, and nobody knew it was going to be the last. For many people, this analogy applies to Mass Effect. It was the last grand odyssey that we collectively embarked on before the adult life hit us like a truck with student loans, a receding hairline, sleeping problems, getting fat, getting bored, and then getting depressed. That's really the reason people love to compare Enderal with Mass Effect 3. Because it hurt a lot of people, and for some, maybe it still hurts, because it was the last act of a teenager before we started the adult part of our lives. But in spite of all of that, we still have a chance to fix it. So let's jump on this magical airship that is Enderal, and walk again in the gardens of our youth, when we were cleverer, happier, and unstoppable. And you will soon end up in the same position as I am. You will realize that the hardest thing with Enderal is letting go after you finish it. And if you want to know my take, here it is. Only suffering, strife, conflict, and struggle give true meaning to things. It is how we know something has value in our lives. If there are no consequences, then nothing has meaning. The game itself is so wonderful, it's worth experiencing it in spite of what happens in the end. After all, I think the game's main theme is not redemption, it's entropy. Everything has an end. So does your story. Thanks for watching.
Hard times these are. Hard times.